if you would listen to an AI track, do you feel like the soul is missing? Or do you feel that they've got it so mathematically correct that it's stirring up an emotion, even though it was just made by a computer?
Really, I have heard certain things on AI that have just blown my mind. I think that's very, very unnerving. We're done. Our jobs are now redundant as songwriters.
Still got weddings, though.
Still got weddings. There's obviously something that's quantifiable about music. The point of initial expression, I don't think, comes from any real understanding. I think it comes from somewhere much deeper than that. You know, the Chovos HaLevavos gives this beautiful marshal about trying to understand Hashem. He says, you know, that when you are walking in the street, you can feel the sun on your face and you can see the grass growing and feel all the hana from the sun.
Welcome to History for the Curious. I'm Mena Reisner, and I host the internationally renowned lecturer, dynamic historian, and tour guide, Rabbi Aubrey Hirsch. Experience our history, confront dilemmas, and reveal the untold stories of 3,000 years of Jewish heritage, from Paris to Cairo, from the Russian Tsar to Maimonides, and from the Sinai Revelation to the French Revolution. Join the fastest growing Jewish history podcast in the world by subscribing to this channel and discovering the events that have shaped us into who we are today. And welcome back to a special episode with a very special guest, and this is in honor of the upcoming Purim. We're going to be talking about music today. Music and history, the concept, the idea behind music, and we're going to be joined by the very well-known Alex Clare. So, music is to be found already in the Torah. We have Shira carried out by the Leviim daily, including on Shabbos, with instruments. And the Torah in Parashas Bereishis emphasizes that Yuval was the father of all musical instruments. So music has been going on since the beginning of time.
Yep, and the fact that the Torah mentions it in specific means that it's either important or it's an accomplishment, but we equally find in non-Jewish history, music appears on Egyptian hieroglyphics at least 3,500 years ago.
So if the Torah talks about it, we obviously have to understand more what music is. So what is the purpose of music?
Music is very powerful. The Vilna Gaon writes that it can achieve Tchias HaMesim, it can revive the dead. And Shira, which you mentioned, has two components, words and the melody. When the Leviim did the Avodah, both of these parts originated in places of Kedusha. The Leviim themselves underwent 5 years of training before carrying out this divine service in the Beis HaMikdash. And in fact, the Kesef Mishnah, in other words, the Shulchan Aruch, in the first chapter of Hilchos Klei HaMikdash, writes that only the Mosherim, the singers of the Leviim, needed these full 5 years. We also find in Divrei Hayomim that there were 40,000 Leviim, Arboim Elef, Lahorim Koil Mizimra, who sang. And it was an obligation. This is a biblical obligation. It's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So it's not sort of a concert. It's an avodah. And both these things together created a great spiritual outcome. In fact, there's a 13th century Spanish Kabbalist, Rav Todros Halevi Abulafia, who explains that Leviim combined their voices with knowledge of Kabbalah, and the Yerushalmi Psachim says that Shira was to bring atonement for the Jewish people during the time of Korbanos, and if you look at the Gemara in Erechim, you'll see that idea discussed there as well. And quite apart from the Beis HaMikdash, we find the requirement for music for prophecy. The Rambam in Mishnah Torah, in Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah, writes, V'chol ha'mechapes, anyone who wants to acquire nevuah, oimdim lefonov kli sher, kadei shetishra olav ruach hanevuos. They have instruments, musical instruments, in order for this prophetic spirit to happen to them. Lefichoch, he continues, b'nei hanavim, those people who are working towards prophecy, lifneim nevel v'sof v'cholil v'chino, they have a harp and various other instruments, v'him mevakshim hanevuah, and that's how they achieve nevuah, and that's true of all Nevi'im with the exception of Moshe Rabbeinu.
So they actually needed the music to receive prophecy?
To bring them to a state where they're able to receive prophecy, we find in Malachim, Elisha was in the presence of two Jewish kings, one of whom was an idolater, so he was unable to attain this level of prophecy. So he said, Hoviu li menagein, v'yihi kenagen ha-menagein, v'atihi olav ruach Hashem. Bring to me somebody who will play music, and as a result, I will be able to receive the Spirit of Hashem, be able to receive Nevuah. And in later centuries, it was used in Kabbalah to attain levels of freeing up the mind. Hearing music, you would be able to concentrate either on the words of the psukim being sung or on the names of Hashem. And Rabbi Avram Abulafia describes there's shir of the angels, there is shir of the Levim, there is the voice that the Novi, the prophet, hears, and the combination of letters of oisios, and that brings us back basically to the comment of the Vilna Gaon that it can revive the dead.
What does the Vilna Gaon mean?
So music has the ability to awaken the area of dimyon, of fantasy, that which is not within the grasp of the five senses. And the Ramban, Nachmanides, in Shara Gmul explains that music is hatanug hachushi haruchni b'yeser. It is the least connected to the physical world. And the actual quote in full is, "There's nothing as delicate as music," and that explains why the young soul of a child is so affected by music, because the child is still connected to the place that they previously were before they were born. In other words, in a world which was completely spiritual. And therefore, when you have Nevuah, which is the voice of Hashem, it's a sort of a sound in the spiritual sense, it has to somehow transition from a spiritual world into a physical world, to this world, and to sound that exists here. It needs a pathway which is essentially non-physical, but exists in the physical world. And that's why, when the Babylonians took the Jews into exile, and they said to them, Shiru lonu mishir Tzion, sing those songs of Tzion, they understood that there's a sort of a hidden capacity within Shira, which the Jews possess, and that's why the response of the Jews was, Eich noch shir eshir Hashem, we would be desecrating something which holds intense Kedusha. And by the way, if it sounds surprising that our conquerors would feel we have something to offer them, there is an early history sefer called Emek HaBocha, who writes that in 1171, during the Crusades, a mass murder of Jews took place in Blois in France when the Jews refused to convert, and an eyewitness reported that as they were burning the Jews sang a traditional Yomim Noiroim Oleinu melody. And these murderers, the knights and the peasants, were so taken by the tune that they adapted it into their Christian liturgy, where, the Emek HaBocha writes, one can still hear it today. So music unlocks doorways, and, it can't be held, it can't be touched. When people come across it, they want more of it, whatever the source, which is why it's a very powerful tool.
I mean, even nowadays, we understand that song is able to affect a person's entire being, their entire sense of self. It's an extremely powerful tool nowadays too.
Yeah, as we go through history, we understand how that developed, because, for instance, the first time we come across music having a negative effect on the Jewish people is a Gemara in Shabbos, where we are told that when Shlomo married Bas Pari, the daughter of Pari, she brought in 1,000 types of zemer, explaining which one is used for which avodah zarah, and he did not protest, says the Gemara. And therefore the daughter of Pari created a situation where an external is being brought into a place of Kedusha, of holiness, and it had a long-term effect on Yerushalayim, ultimately being connected to Churban Beis HaMikdash, as the Gemara says. And then, also within Eretz Yisrael, the music koil is compromised when the Greeks in the Second Temple, at times of the Hashmonaim, brought in, as part of their outside chokhmah, the concept of Greek song. And the Gemara in Chagiga tells us that Acher became a heretic because Zemer Yevoni lo posuk mipumoi. The songs of the Greeks never sort of departed from his lips, even though he is a teacher to the Tana of Meir Balanes. And in fact, eventually, Chazal would take the option to deliberately discontinue many of the songs and the koyach of koil, of music, that existed during the temple times, in order that it shouldn't become converted or diluted during the period of the exile. But as you said, this is all in the olden days, the biblical times, temple times, not so relevant practically today.
You mean because we're not singing tunes at that level of spirituality, at that level of ruchnius, or you mean for that goal of connection?
Basically, we don't have those abilities anymore. We're not given that level of spirituality. So what is available? Well, even in today's world, music opens the soul. It's as simple as that. There's no bracha on it. Unlike other types of things that we hear, like thunder or sight or smell, because, as we mentioned earlier, it's almost non-physical. But it creates an instant environment of emotion, and that's why it is forbidden to listen to during the 3 weeks.
Even obviously in the secular world, the non-Jewish world, major sporting events, it's all expressed through song and chants. It's a hergish. It reveals where your soul is at. There's something very deep about it, even in a completely secular sense.
Absolutely. And it is what you might call authentic. But the question is, what do you pour that emotion into? Into a beer or into prayer? In fact, I remember Ramesh Shapira saying the following. You go to a wedding. How do you know when you're dancing and there is a ruach who you are being mesamech? Is it yourself or the chosen? The solution is the next day. You wake up. Are you upset that it's all over? Or is there a certain high from yesterday? If there is a certain level of high, that means that you connected to the concept of achdus or to the concept of real simcha, and that lasts because something that is spiritual doesn't dissipate. Music reveals the emotions. Song is deeper than words. It reveals at a deeper level, which is why, for instance, you've got all the laws of Kol Nidrei, a man listening to a woman's voice. And music resonates an intensity. Nothing can bring us to tears faster than listening. You can listen to a song, one song, and be in tears. And in fact, it activates more of the areas of the brain, the amygdala, the hippocampus. And in terms of the abstract world, hearing music evokes more joy than seeing art. It reduces pain better. Literature can affect via the narrative, art via, the symbolism, but music's immediacy is stronger. I mean, imagine if you watched a film with subtitles, so you could follow the plot, but there was no music. Basically, the film barely exists. And beyond that, there is something very disturbing about music. I once interviewed a survivor who played in the orchestra, in one of the orchestras in Auschwitz, and she told me they had their own barracks, and one day Mengele Yamach Shemai walked in and asked her to play a particular piece. He appreciated music, which is disturbing. But as we said above, what did he do with that heightened sense? He felt alive enough to kill people. He wasn't elevated, because music can sensitize the emotions, but it doesn't channel it somewhere positive per se. That's, of course, emotionally. But if we take it higher than that, the Piasetzner Rebbe writes on the posuk Toshiri Merish Amona, that the highest level of emunah can be experienced by shir. He's quoting Rabbaran of Karlin, and that depth depends on three things. The kavanah, the intent of the composer, and of the listener, and the environment where this music is being played. If all three are pure, I will achieve ruchnius. As Ramesh Weinberger explains, non-Jewish music can be powerful, yet it can create depression or hololus. Why aren't these happy tunes making people happy? Because the composer is coming from a negative place. And when we say it brings me to simcha, we really mean sort of a form of ecstasy. We don't mean that the person is happy. The Gaon and the Malbim explain that simcha isn't a sudden emotion, it's a state of elevation, of serenity. And the Torah paskins that in simchas nesuin, without klei shir, you can't get married unless there is music. The Mogen Avraham quotes the Maril, who's one of the fathers of Minhagei Ashkenaz, that when there was a decree at one stage from the local non-Jewish ruler forbidding any music at a wedding, the Maril instructed the Chosn and Kala to move the whole wedding to another city because it's a requirement. Now, there is a fascinating difference of opinion between Rashi and the Ramban, which is brought by, of all people, the Shagas Aryeh. Does simcha bring to shira, or is it the other way round? Actually, it's not a machlokas. Music Shira can bring to simcha on an emotional level. But at that stage, simcha can make me desire shir. We can be inspired by this to song. Think about the Yomim Neroim. Think about Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. That longing is our neshama speaking. That's why we talk about the shira as Oz Yoshir in the future. And that's why Rashi says there, it's a hint to Trias HaMesim. We start Pesach by speaking, Pesach, and then we get to Shira and Trias HaMesim, which is why Rav Shrugel Feivel Mendelovich used to say that if you really want to sing a song with words properly, you have to sing it for at least 15 minutes until the words penetrate, taking you to a much higher state. But that's in terms of the machshava, of how music works. Let's look at the history. In the non-Jewish world, it's really in the Renaissance period, 1400 to 1600 approximately, that music becomes more expressive. It focuses not only on religious purposes, but also on performance. There are instruments, the keyboard, etc. Then in the Baroque period, which is the next 150 years, you have the birth of the orchestra, of opera, and then you have the composers, really, that we recognize for the first time, Bach and Vivaldi and others. Whereas in the Jewish world, in the medieval period, so up to the end of the period of the Rishonim, Jewish music is primarily oral. There are very few musical pieces written at the time. But Jewish music drew from and influenced surrounding musical cultures, even though there were unique Jewish religious themes. And it was the piyut, which was often based on a song dating back to the temple times, and you have poets and philosophers from the times of the Rishonim, most famously the Kuzari, who talks about the bringing together of music and poetry and philosophy and expressing the yearning of the soul of the neshama and the divine presence. But in the 16th century, choirs and music began to play a central role, accompanied by much machlokes, the first of which occurred in Italy at the end of the 16th century. Rabbi Leon Modena, whom we have met, we've done some podcasts about him, was an author of poetry and prose, both in Hebrew and Italian, and was a Talmud Chacham, and knew his science and Renaissance literature. He encouraged a friend of his, Salomone Rossi, to compose the first collection of what's called polyphonic notes in Hebrew for the synagogue. Rossi was employed at the ducal palace in Mantua. He was a violinist, he was a composer, and he worked alongside Christian composers, and then he would return home every night to his house in the ghetto. And he introduces this music from the Christian world into the ghetto. And in 1605, Modena is living in Ferrara, and an incident occurs in Shul. He explained, we've got a number of knowledgeable men who know something about the science of song, who on the Yomim Tovim, as he puts it, raise their voices and joyfully sing melodies such as Enkel Elokeinu, Aleinu, Adonai Olam, according to this polyphonic music. And now a man stood up, it's actually the rabbi, to drive them out, saying it's not proper to do this, song is forbidden, since the temple was destroyed. So Rav Modena writes a lengthy tshuva to defend the practice, which he sends to the Venetian rabbinate, and they agree with him. And in fact, he quotes in this, so to speak, tshuva, Emmanuel of Rome, who was a Jewish poet in the 14th century, who writes, "What does the science of music say to the Christian? I was stolen out of the land of the Hebrews," which is from Yosef in Bereshis. In other words, that the music of the Catholic Church was stolen from the Jews. But his tshuva did not bring the matter to rest. In Senegalia in 1645, the shul erupts in dispute. Musaf is brought to a halt in the middle of Chazaras Hashatz because the chazan was repeating words. And not just any words, Birkas Koyanim and others. As the Rav wrote to Rabbi Trabato, they filled their paper on every side with lies and falsehood in telling you what happened, because on the festival, when they repeated the name of God several times, although I remained silent, the lead singer was warned about continuing this. The Honourable Reb Shmuel Norzi, who should have reproved him, supported his opinion. He claimed that one may sing the name of God 100 times in a row, and all the more so one may repeat the word keser, crown. Now, keser obviously is the name of one of the 10 spheres, but the question is whether they were referring it to God's name or just the keser that we come across in Musaf. And things were so heated that initially the non-Jewish local authorities were called in, and they had to arbitrate between these two warring factions. But that didn't settle things either, because it split the Kehillos in Italy. Venice, Verona and Ferrara allowed Chazoros Hashatz to have the repetition in it, and they claimed that the Roman Mipano had allowed it in 1620, but since he was no longer alive, you couldn't ask him. Then we moved to Corfu, where the Rav there wrote a book called Kolis Nishborim, Broken Sounds, various sounds that he claimed were broken over time. It started with a dispute over the kashrus of the shofar that the Kehillah used. The rabbi called this section Kol HaTruah, not the broken sound of a shofar, but the sound of a broken shofar. And it escalated to a full-blown machlokas about singing Shema. And in Hebrew, it sounds better what he wrote. He said, instead of a koil orev, instead of a sweet voice, it was a koil oroiv, the sound of a raven. And once again, Rabbonim from Tzfas, Salonika, Padua, Yerushalayim, Venice, they were all involved in this machlekas, which to us seems so trivial, but this was breaking new ground, and various truvas, and in the end, the singers stepped away from it. So it would take another 150 years until music and choirs and song becomes the mainstream that we know about today. It was initially extremely revolutionary, very frowned upon by many.
So Modena was the first documented case we have of singing in shul, of choirs and
Yes. Yeah, singing not. In other words, singing as a kehillah,
as a professional,
the piyutim, but yes, having something, and having music, writing music. In fact, the whole question that they had between the composer and Rav Modena is, do you write the musical notes right to left to right? But this was the first time, yes.
So before that, then the Lechadoides and the Kaddish, the things that we're very used to, Kedusha, there was never any singing at all.
There were piyutim, and they did sing, and especially Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, at times like this, but they didn't create music.
Where'd those songs come from then?
So that's why we see them as originating from the Beis HaMikdash or as a result of Churban.
Right. There's that one song that we do of our Kohanim on Yom Kippur that legend has it came from the Beis HaMikdash.
It could be. It's now difficult to know.
It is odd, though, that we've been singing in shuls for thousands of years, and we don't have a song of Masorah that has lasted throughout time.
It's because we move from place to place, and in that dislocation, and because of the modernizing of music. What there used to be, the idea of polyphonic sounds, that you have contrasting sounds, it was quite new. If you look, for instance, at the church area...
You mean harmonies?
More than that, when you had two almost opposing notes, not so much a first voice and a second voice, Gregorian chants, which they used in church, were, I think the word is monophonic, I'm not quite up on the terminology. It was very uninventive, shall we say. And all of music was like that. And there were no instruments which gave the idea
the colours.
Of broadening music.
So really... recently, right? You said 150 years is when music really took off. It's Hasidus, really, that was the music boom for the Jews, no?
Yes, although you also have Lahavdil, on the Reform end of things, they introduced the organ. Right? You never had a musical instrument in a synagogue.
That was a direct imitation of non-Jewish worship.
Yeah, absolutely. So it doesn't have Kedusha. But Hasidus adopts music as a means of what you could call ecstatic worship, and also of bonding of people together, of transformation, for joy, tshuva, achdus. In other words, it's all the things that we take for granted at a kumsitz. It's not actually that old. Now, interestingly, it's worth noting that at times Jewish music was appropriated by the non-Jews. And Beethoven, Here's, I've got it written here, the sixth movement of Beethoven's Quartet in C minor, opus 131, even though it's not...
Sounds like I'm listening to Classic FM.
Right, I don't have the same rhythm. Although it's not as repetitive, can be heard the Yom Kippur Kol Nidrei. In fact, I listened to it this afternoon, and you do hear an element of it.
We'll see if we could get a little piece to play now.
One theory is that in 1824, the Jews of Vienna are finally permitted to build their shul, which they built in 1826, for those who are up to date on our podcasts on Vienna. And they offered Vienna's most famous composer to write a piece of music for it. And although Beethoven didn't take the commission, he might have done some research on Jewish music and learned of this tune.
That's interesting.
Now, in the second half of the 19th century, the Rabbonim in Yerushalayim instituted a unique prohibition against playing musical instruments at weddings, a decree that remains in many Orthodox communities today. The ban was primarily the result or the work of Rav Meir Auerbach, the author of Imre Bina, the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Yerushalayim, and the most commonly cited reason for it relates to a cholera epidemic that struck Yerushalayim in 1865, and it killed a number of people, including some of Yerushalayim's Talmidei Chachamim. And the Sefer Beis Chassanim writes that to find out why Hashem was punishing the city, one of the great Rabbanim made a Shailas Chaloim, a question which is asked when a person goes to sleep. And in his dream, it was revealed that the cause of the plague was a lack of respect for the Kosel Maravi and the mourning over it. And because of that, Rav Meir Auerbach and others enacted a decree that no musical instruments should be played at weddings in Yerushalayim. And within a few days of enacting the decree, the plague came to an end. Now, Rav Tuvia Freund, in his Sefer Shalmei Simcha, says that he asked the elders of Yerushalayim, including Rav Eliashiv, why there's no documentation of this, whereas the plague is well documented, but no one recorded how it ended. And he was told that the main reason for the decree was due to modesty. The novelty of musical instruments in Yerushalayim at the time meant that women and girls would draw near to hear it, and this sometimes led to mixing of men and women, and therefore Rav Auerbach put a stop to it by this decree.
So for any of our listeners who haven't been to a wedding in Jerusalem, in a lot of the Orthodox weddings, then there is just a drummer.
Correct.
With a singer,
yes.
with a bloke miming bass. Quite fascinating to hear it.
There's no music.
Yes, but although there are many weddings, of course, that do have music, and for other reasons.
Right, so first of all, the Sfardim never accepted this, the ban, so to speak, and therefore they do. And also it's unclear whether the ban was instituted only in the old city of Yerushalayim and within the walls, or whether all of Yerushalayim is included.
Right, so that brings us to the modern period. I mean, you could say that the role of music is almost psychological for us in order to function properly. Music is such an inherent part of everyday life, at the highs and the lows, and our everydays, our exercising, our meditating, anything a person does, generally without people around, has music involved. And of course, at events. So the role of music has changed somewhat.
Yeah, I'm sure our guest, who he's a world expert on music, which I am not, will be able to explain that and have more insight into that. So, what about, finally, using words and melodies created by non-Jews? There is a famous opinion of the Bach, the Bayis Chodosh, who lived in the 17th century, who writes that when they sing in synagogues tunes which the Christians sing in their houses of worship, it's only forbidden if it's specific to worship, to so to speak, avodah zarah, because then it becomes connected to avodah zarah. But if they're not specifically for that, it's a more general tune, then the Bach says there's no prohibition. If it's not special to the church, it can be brought into the shul. It's cited by the Mishnah Berurah when there is a discussion what disqualifies a chazan, because the Shulchan Aruch says that the chazan is removed from his position when there is something which doesn't accord with the job that he has. And the Ramah says one of the disqualifying features is if the chazan sings non-Jewish tunes, to which the Mishnah Berurah cites this Bach, that only the type of tunes that are idolatrous, that are church-related, that are related to religious worship, but otherwise not. Now, there is quite some breadth of opinion on this. The Tzitz Eliezer, normally very lenient in things, was asked if it's permissible to chant prayers and bakoshes using the melodies of Shirei Agavim, from the organ's love songs. And he starts by saying it's an abomination to clothe sacred things in filthy garments. And then he discusses the Rif and the Ramah and the Sefer Hasidim and the Bach, but he takes the strict approach. Rav Moshe Feinstein writes that the melodies that Christians sing in their house of worship are forbidden to be heard even on the radio. In other words, even if it's not live. And not only the melodies that are sung now, but even what they used to sing long ago, even though they've stopped using them nowadays, you may not listen to them. And he says, any melody that a Christian composed for a verse of Tehillim is forbidden because they're intended for prayer. And you're not even allowed to listen to it to sort of earn a living, in other words, to use for another purpose. But if you know that the author of the melody didn't intend to sing it for worship, but just in general, for the sake of enjoying the singing, even though the composer of the song is a non-Jew, that's okay.
What about a Xmas song? I wouldn't say it's specifically written for, spiritual Christianity in any sense, but it's for a Christian holiday.
So it's very different. There are two very different types of them. There are carol singing, right?
Yeah.
They very much contain Christian worship. In fact, the whole reason it came about was as a mode of worship. Whereas if someone releases a tune just before that time of year, so it should get to number one and they'll make a lot of money off it, even if it's talking about the festival, that basically is completely secular.
Right.
I would have thought. I'm not
opposed. So you think if one is listening to radio and a carol comes on at that time of year, one should probably turn it off?
Probably, yes. As I say, I'm not a halachic authority, but reading from what we've just heard, I would have thought so. Now, there's one last opinion on this, Rav Ovadia Yosef, who quotes the Rambam that a person has to serve Hashem with simcha. And he says, and it is on this that the great men of the generations of Edut HaMizrach relied to compose songs and hymns to the melody of Arab songs. Here really we're talking about the music created by Arabs, and he said we then put our own words to it. So it's not quite the same as what Rav Moshe and the Bach were discussing, and therefore you can use it at weddings, bar mitzvahs, Shabbos, Yom Tov, based on the melody of Arab songs. And even though he says, the Rav Chaim Falachi, the author of Kaf HaChaim, objected, but the halacha is not like him.
And we'll speak to Alex Clare shortly as well if there's such a thing as objective, secular music. Fascinatingly, a Chabad friend told me that the tune of the French national anthem is the one that they use for the tefillah of Aderes V'Amunah on Yom Kippur in Chabad. Fascinating.
It's very interesting, and the truth is it works perfectly with Hasidus. In other words, this is not sort of an excuse, but the essence of what Hasidim view as the purpose of Judaism.
You must know that national anthem being semi-French, right?
La patrie. Yes, it's La Marseillaise. Yes. We did actually discuss the words of it when we dealt with the French Revolution.
Can't believe we got Rabbi Hirsch to sing.
Right, that's and how bloodthirsty it is. I possibly sang last time round as well. Anyway, but we will close with one halacha, which is perhaps unknown to people, and that is that the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah codify that playing musical instruments or hearing live music at a meal is forbidden if you serve wine. And in fact, the Bach strengthens this and bans all music which is live at non-mitzvah meals. So the same Bach, who is very lenient about music that might have originated in the church, here is very stringent. There are exceptions to this rule. According to many, music is permitted at a Sudas mitzvah, at a bris, at a pidyon haben, a bar mitzvah, Purim Suda, and some poskim like Ramosha allow a Stocker fundraising event. Rav Vosner allows siyum, but not sort of a meal in a restaurant. And I know that in Eretz Yisrael, there are some hechsherim that won't give a hechsher to a restaurant where they have live music, even though there's nothing wrong with the food.
Well, that's a fascinating historical introduction, and now we're going to move on to our interview with Alex Clare. It is an honor to welcome Alex Clare into the studio today. Alex is a platinum-selling, award-winning artist whose voice is instantly recognizable to millions of people all over the world. He's currently the most listened-to Orthodox Jewish singer globally. His life story, the choices, the tension between mainstream success and religious commitment is well documented, genuinely fascinating, and I strongly recommend our listeners to explore it if they haven't already. It's a remarkable story of Mesiras Nefesh and a real chizuk. Hello, Alex.
Hello, Anna.
It's great to have you here.
Great to be had.
Not often that I sit down with a good friend in the studio, so that makes a nice change. Of course, Rabbi Hirsch is a friend too, sorry. I mean an interviewee.
It's fine. It's all right.
You're also,
I won't tell him.
You won't hear this.
Okay.
You're also somewhat of a Hasidus mentor of mine.
Oh.
I come from a very Litvish background, as you know, and we've spent many hours over the years discussing Hasidus as you try and attempt to warm up my soul.
Your soul's already warm, Anna. It's already warm.
Oh, see, that means a lot coming from the Hasidus mentor. But today we're going to be speaking about music itself, which is a huge part of everyone's life. It's part of history. It's part of the Jewish journey from the very beginning, from the Levium in the Beis HaMikdash. So I just want to start by asking you, what is music?
Wow.
I mean, before diving into songs, emotions, before getting technical, what is music at its core?
People have been making rhythm and humming melody forever. The first instruments were drums and things that made a banging noise. And, you see primitive cultures, they always have some kind of like rhythm. There's something that people need to express by way of rhythm. People have been making noise, and before that, people were singing. Not that we had a complex understanding of melody, but people have been making tunes for a very, very long time. And there's something that has to be expressed and can only be expressed through song that isn't really quantifiable. In the idea that Nagina comes from the place of Ratzain, it comes from a very, very deep place of desire and will. Although there is mathematical theory behind music, you can theorize music, and theory is very solid. There's even rules in music that are very solid and you can't really breach them. Nevertheless, there's something very, very primal and ethereal to music.
Does music carry an inherent meaning, or do the listeners supply it? In other words, could you write a song from a certain place or certain emotion, and the listeners will hear it and get a very different emotion and feeling from it?
You can see now with modern technology, there is an algorithm to music. AI has figured it out. There's certain applications you can use that really understand the emotional weight of certain sounds and vibes. It's unbelievable that you can sort of transcend what human understanding is about it. Computers can figure it out. I don't think when someone writes a beautiful piece of music, there's any real analysis behind it. It just comes from a very, very deep place of understanding. I think, you have the musical geniuses of the Beethovens and the Mozarts and the Vivaldis, and you can't imagine what it was like in their brain, how they visualized and understood music. But music is, something that is so, even when it's on the most intellectual level, it still comes from the most basic point of expression in people's souls.
So it's interesting you mentioned AI without getting into the whole AI debate, but focusing on music. Do you feel that if you would listen to an AI track, do you feel like the soul is missing? Or do you feel that they've got it so mathematically correct that it's stirring up an emotion, even though it was just made by a computer?
It depends on the program. really, I have heard certain things on AI that have just blown my mind. I think that's very, very unnerving. Like we're done. Our jobs are now redundant as songwriters.
Still got weddings, though.
Still got weddings, yeah. Exactly, for now. There's obviously something that's quantifiable about music. the point of initial expression, I don't think comes from any real understanding. I think it comes from somewhere much deeper than that of it. You know, the Chovos HaLevavos gives this beautiful marshal about trying to understand Hashem. He says, you know, that when you are walking in the street, you can feel the sun on your face and you can see the grass growing and feel all the hana from the sun. If you were to look at the sun and to stare at it, you'd destroy your retinas. You know, you'd be in serious pain very, very quickly. That you can theorize and even gaze at the sun directly, but you'll get nothing positive out of it. However, if you just absorb the warmth from the sun and you see what the sun is doing, you're having hana constantly without ever actually like chapping what the sun is. And I think that's a marshal for Hashem, obviously, like not delving too deep into trying to understand what Hashem really is. And also with music, you have that too, that you can analyze music, but as soon as you go down that route, you're probably going to lose the actual hana element, the pure benefit you get from it.
Why can the same song be life-changing for some and feel completely empty to other people?
It's unbelievable, isn't it? There's certain genres of music that just light people up. There's certain periods in a person's life, levels of maturity or immaturity, things that are very basic can be very, very powerful, and other songs can be just completely, you know, nothing.
Meaningless.
Completely meaningless. It's a very, very personal thing. I think also, when you have a piece of music that's performed from a place of sincerity and realness, I think that will, if a person is emotionally sensitive, they'll feel it. I think sincerity is, you know, everything with music. To understand music is one thing, but music's not necessarily about understanding, it's about feeling.
So it's really different to all the other senses. If someone cooks a dish with so much passion and really works into creating that beautiful meal, but if it doesn't taste good, I think objectively no one will taste the passion that went into it. You're saying that music is different to our other senses, that you can literally feel the sincerity behind it, even if it isn't necessarily your taste in music.
Sometimes, even if it's not your taste in music, the simplicity and the beauty of a real song is very deep. You know, in Nashville, they say, you know, 4 chords and a lot of truth. And that's what a song really needs. And people tend to try to be very intelligent with their music. Beethoven is incredibly simple. And that sounds ridiculous, but a lot of the melodies of Beethoven are so simple. But the arrangement of what's going behind it and the little tiny details, the little shifts, the little changes, that are just incredible. It's inspirational and it's beautiful, and it's the reason why Beethoven, you know, knocks people's socks off today. Even though of all the classical composers, you know, the arrangements are complex, but the melodies themselves are very, very simple.
Would you say that's one of the reasons why Shlomo Carlebach's music has stood the test of time?
100%. When he made his melodies, they were coming from a very, very deep
even
and
though they were so
place.
simple. Sometimes
So simple, but that's it. People overcomplicate a lot of things. The cliche is it's always about the notes that you don't play. It's totally true. It's totally true. Holding off, pausing, leaving space. That's where, in music production, that's where the gadless is.
Wow.
You know, you hear producers like Quincy Jones and who has incredibly complex arrangements to very, very simple melodies, but still loads and loads of space.
Why do we have such strong memories associated with music? Possibly more, again, than any of our other senses.
I think smell might beat it.
Really?
I think smell just beats it, but melody is...
the shook comes to mind.
The shook comes to mind, absolutely. Wow, it takes you back.
But I heard a song recently. I haven't heard it in 25 years. And it instantly transported me to Rota with my father.
Beautiful.
Which is, I have no recollection of that Rota. In fact, I called him up and said, did you do Rota for us? And I just didn't remember. But I suddenly remembered the car, and I remember why I sat in the car, and it's 25 years.
I have something similar as well. There's a George Harrison song I can remember clearly playing in the kitchen when I was about 4 years old. And I can remember hearing that song for the first time.
And then you could visualize the rest.
Absolutely.
You could see the kitchen.
Absolutely.
Why?
I guess it's like an access point. It's like a hook that our brains hang on to. We feel something with the melody. There's a familiarity there. Even when we hear a great song, it's like both the most innovative thing that we've heard and also like the most ancient thing that we've heard. You know,
so if you had to define what spiritual music means, what would you say? What is spiritual music?
I think we sort of repress ourselves and we sort of put ourselves into boxes, and the idea of a person being vulnerable emotionally is quite scary to most people, especially men. You know, like, what do you mean,
really?
I've got to feel something now. Yeah. I think music really opens us up. You know, it's the famous midrash about the Sudra of Achashverosh. The Sudra of Achashverosh, that, you know, Chazal tell us that there was no music there. The Shitta, the Bedavka. if they had been playing music, the scope for there to be Huriri Tshuva, for people to be opened up in their vulnerability, even at the Sudra Achashverosh, would have been, an amazing thing that could have happened. Music opens us up. You got the Mim Choimcha moments, every Shabbos morning, everyone waits for their favorite Mim Choimcha, and most people let go for a few seconds. In a very formal structure, it's Kedusha, and there's you're standing with your feet together in that place, but most people feel something by a Mim Choimcha or an Avinu Malkeinu or a Ne'ilah. There's something about those Nigunim that really help. If you had a Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur davening without the Nigunim that it's not the same, is it? It just doesn't go to the same place.
Terrible when you get to another shul for whatever reason you're in a different place.
When they don't do an Avinu Malkeinu, you're like, where's the Avinu Malkeinu?
You feel you've been robbed.
Literally, you've just stolen my Yom Noraim from me. I was waiting for that moment. My whole tshuva experience is dependent on that tune.
Yeah.
I
mean, you mentioned Purim, so we know that Nichnas Yain Yotzasod, wine reveals someone's true essence. Mm-hmm. It doesn't change them, right? It reveals who they are.
Exactly.
Would you say music is similar, that it reveals your true essence, or do you think it's more powerful that it can actually affect change?
I don't think it's necessarily your true essence, but it reveals parts of you. It opens you up. It disarms you. It takes away some of the...
Takes away your guard.
Yeah, it takes away some of the barriers. There's this example that Noam Elimelech gives about Kesher versus Zemel. Kesher is the shir, a shir, like a song that's a shir. That's the idea of being makashi yourself to something. It's a means of connecting, whereas the mazamel, it means to prune away, to cut away. So melody has the ability to both cut away and help you detach from the mundane, from the physical and the laborious, and give you the ability to connect to something higher and stronger.
How important would you say is inspiration, or what a person is going through when it comes to writing songs? Can one write a song because he understands what notes work, how a song is constructed, what would resonate, almost like an architect, quite coldly?
Yes.
Or is the feeling at the time vital to the song?
You can approach music very mathematically, and it works. And in fact, if you're writing a piece for like a concerto, and you're having an orchestra play a piece of music, you better be on your theory game. You're going to have to really understand what all the different parts are doing. But again, that's very formulaic and mathematical. There are certain chord structures that work, and there are certain things where there's complete dissonance. And it's interesting that nowadays with the, auto-tune and all these different things that people use in music production, they sort of iron out all the creases. The sort of the humanity, the breaking voice, the slight dissonance in the vocal performance, or a musical instrument being sharp or flat. And things are a bit too perfect now. Yeah. It's very analytical. It's going through computers, and the computer is ironing out all the creases.
So it's like art that people want to see the humanity in it, and humanity means almost a level of error, human error.
Not only that, sometimes the error is where the real beauty is. Shlomo Carlebach is not a technically great singer, but he's a real one when he sings. For that reason, that it still has that raw human element that people need.
What makes a song timeless? Why do some hit songs disappear when the next hit comes, and some just stay forever?
I wish I knew the answer to that. I'd be a very wealthy man if I knew that. I wish I knew. It's interesting.
Even in your own experience, right? There's certain songs that are huge, right?
It's very hard to define. There are certain things you control. The mixing and the mastering, there are certain ways to give more energy to a record when it's recorded. That makes it more of the moment. And, in production, things can sound very dated. Everything comes around in cycles. Certain production methods, certain tones, certain drum machines there's a cycle. 30, 40 year cycle. Things sort of come back around. The quality of a recording changes, and you can sort of remaster, and sometimes you'll hear records from the 60s that are sonically way superior to things that you'll hear today, and vice versa. Some people really focus on those, but that's not the song, that's just the way the song is presented. There are certain melodies that are ancient melodies that are used still to this day, certain patterns that are recycled, and chord structures that are timeless. The melody from the hymn Amazing Grace, those melodies are way older than the songs that we know. They're melodies that have been around for a very, very long time, that people were singing, just hit you in a certain place that you can't really begin to understand. And the Gunim, in Chabad, there's a very strong Masorah that there's the Avinu Malkeinu and the Bnei Heichala. There's two tunes there that are Chabad and Gunim, and they hold that they are, people will say, from the times of the Beis HaMikdash. There's a Masorah from the times of the Beis HaMikdash for these Nigunim. I don't know if that's true.
What's the Chabad of Avinu Malkeinu? That they say is, that's
It's
centuries
powerful,
old.
man. Centuries old. An ancient melody. There's the Chabad Bnei Hechala also, they say, is a very, very ancient nigun. Before the words of Bnei Hechala were put in there, they say people have been singing that. So sometimes Nugunim, melodies, tunes, have just been hitting people in the right place for a long time.
Fascinating. How has constant access to the global library of music changed our musical experience? Has it increased music's power, or has it decreased it? Because there's just so many options, and you can easily just skip to the next track, or in 1.5 an hour, you could have listened to an array of music that our ancestors wouldn't have discovered in millennia. How has that changed the listener's experience?
When I was a kid and, we had CDs or tapes, music was very, very tribal. Like, you knew what you listened to. You knew who you liked. And a person's record collection or CD collection was a very strong indicator of who they were and what sort of group they belonged to.
Right.
With the advent of the MP3 player and then accessibility to streaming music from every
genre possible,
country, flavor, it's totally accessible. I think it's only beneficial to people's understanding of music, because people are finding references in songs that people wouldn't have accessed 40, 50 years ago, and now it's common knowledge. There are certain pockets where you have a very limited pool of music to draw from, and that can also bring like greatness. France, there was until like the 80s or 90s, there were tariffs, so to speak, on foreign music. So people in France were only accessing very specific sampling music that they had access to in their, in their daladama, so to speak. And by accessing that music, they were creating something really unique because they were limited in many ways. But there's a big side to be said that accessing the world of music is a good thing.
Right. Because people will never know what they'll be touched by, only what they were fed by back in the day. And now they can actually get inspiration from a lot of places. Jewish music can be seen as quite commercial these days.
Can it? Playing to the gallery, I call it, Benna.
Trying to be PC here.
That's right. Diplomatic.
Everyone wants to get chasna gigs, and it's a good Jewish business, right? That's how people have been making their panosa from it. Does that affect the quality or variety of music that's being produced? The fact that it's quite commercial.
Is that a trick question, Benna? Are you painting me into a corner here?
Yes.
Yes, Yes, Menna.
Yes.
In Israel, at the moment, Baruch Hashem, you can find a wealth of really good music. Brilliant lyrics, great production, from people who are speaking Lashon HaKodesh as a first language. You'll see people who really understand. You see this young man, Botzal, who passed away last year, an Israeli musician who wrote the song Tzion, and I was listening to a Motzi Shabbos, and it's like a piyut. You see the words from it, it's like a peitan. It's like mam's like a peitan. It's so deep what he's saying, and thank God he had people like this. But he never made any money from his music. He didn't make a penny, but he was like a modern day peitan. You see what he's saying, his understanding of Hebrew, and it wasn't math rock. It wasn't formulaic. It was very deep what he was yearning for when he writes this tune. And I said to some of my friends, on Tisha B'Av, we should add this as like one of our kinnos, for this as a kinna for Tisha B'Av, because it's beautiful. It's expressing so much of what we should be feeling. Most songwriters, most people in the world of Jewish music aren't doing that. The sort of the money behind Jewish music is in the US, realistically. And you are correct that the sort of impetus is to push to get chasnas, simchas, concerts, exactly, for those gigs, and it is stifling creativity. It's changing, but there's a bit of a dumbing down in music, and it's a lot of people playing to the gallery, and there's only so many boy colors you can write.
From what I hear, there's no limit.
There's no limit. Yeah, variations on a theme, right? It's a great thing to have. The fact that there is an industry and there are musicians you can make a living from playing Jewish music, from singing gigs. But it is limited creatively. But we're a tiny, section of the world.
Yeah.
So how big could the industry be?
When is Alex Clare's Boy Color coming out?
Watch this space, man.
You heard it here first.
Absolutely.
Do you know when a song will be a hit, or are you sometimes shocked?
No. You don't know, but you know when a song is a good song. You know, you can walk away feeling, oh yeah, that's a good one. That's good. Everything else is siyata d'shmaya.
But does that not come with a disappointment? If you were to, let's say, record a song that meant so much to you, and you genuinely know this is a good song, and it just didn't resonate with people.
Yeah, it's not a great feeling. Happened to me quite a few times. I've written songs that I literally...
Not that it ever happened to you, of course.
It's definitely happened to me. It's definitely happened to me. I've written songs that I think are the best thing I've ever written, and then it goes out and 50,000 streams, and you're like, oh. And that sounds like a lot, right? But when you're dealing with millions of streams, 50,000 is...
right.
But that's, again, it's siyata d'shmaya. You can make your hishtadlus, and you make your hishtadlus by making the music. You never say never. You never know what will happen with a song nowadays with TikTok and Instagram and all these reels that people are making. You can go viral to an extent.
Even at a later date.
Even at a later date. So it's always worth creating and putting out. It's interesting now that it's much easier to produce good music on a much smaller budget.
Which has allowed more artists to enter.
It's more accessible. People can create great music in their bedrooms. There is nothing as joyful for me that when I've made a piece of music and I'm sitting in a sound studio with a 10-piece orchestra, string section playing my music back to me. It's a great feeling. It's a really special thing when it clicks at that point. But the reality is that doesn't necessarily pay the bills, and it's not a guarantee that you're going to get a successful record when you can write no simple song with like 3 words and a simple beat. That would be much more popular.
Right. You're at a unique vantage point in the sense that you've had a history with secular music and now Jewish music. What would you say is the essence of the difference between the two?
In secular music, in non-Jewish music, there's always trends and there's always things that are leading the market and reference points that are in other people's music. And you have that in Jewish music as well. You have a lot less in the world of non-Jewish music. And if there's a nitzutz, if there's a little spark of holiness there we can bring to the world of Jewish music to sort of open up people's perspective. Again, the big driver for Jewish music was for so long, like we said earlier, chasnas. Like chasna was the thing that was really pushing people. So therefore, a lot of Jewish singers would really push really hard, bombastic voices. So you got to be louder than the horn section and the string section and the and the choir of 10-year-old Hasidic kids. So what's happened is that that's kind of how people are approaching the production side of things. It will change. The world of non-Jewish music has always had a very big influence in the world of Jewish music. It is, it might be epicurus to say such a thing, but the reality is that nearly all Jewish music nowadays has its roots in non-Jewish popular music.
Anyone who's been to a wedding recently has heard that trance music has entered the frum world, right?
Yeah.
Most
people
love to
dance. People love to dance.
Simple as that.
Simple as that. And when you have a beat-led piece of music, you have a piece of EDM music, and it's, making people want to move and dance. It's not intelligent. It's not analytical. It's just raw, and people want to dance and move. It's very simple, and it appeals to very, very base parts of a person, which are very important. Those parts we have to elevate as well. They have to also be brought to the table.
But what about those who say that it's lost its Yiddish attain?
What does the Yiddish attain even mean, man?
That's what I'm asking you.
What does it even mean? I think it's just a culture. There's a culture there that's developed. You can find in Hungarian, Blue Danube or things that are associated with Hungary, you can find those reference points in Hasidic music. You can hear those melodies, those waltzes. You go to a regular Shabbos morning in a Heimish Minyan and you hear the tunes for Nachdishach or Koimcha, and you can hear a reference of some 19th century Hungarian composer in there. It's all there. It's not a Yiddish attain. It's a taste of something older, and therefore we associate the ancient with the profane and the holy. So it's that's where we go. It's not a Yiddish attain.
Yeah,
the Yiddish attain is even the Gunei Chabad, which I have they have a huge place in my heart, and in my own personal bonus Hashem, I think they're the best Nigunim there are personally. But the majority of them also you can find a reference point in Russian folk music.
I think what you said rings true, that we associate old-fashioned with something conservative, with something being more Jewish per se.
Yes. It's not true.
Yeah.
It's just we get comfortable with something and it becomes part of the establishment. But do you think when someone first sang a waltz as a Memkoimcha, people were like, what are you doing? This is not what we do.
Yeah.
I'm sure people complained. Yeah. Some saying, no, shouting at the back of the show. I'm sure that happened the first time. We have commandeered, co-opted, and exploited non-Jewish music It's what we do with music. We take it and we elevate it.
Right. So I was just going to ask, how's that work of we take it and we elevate it? Is music so spiritual in essence that no matter where it originates from, we can always interpret it in a different way and have spiritual, pure emotions, even if the original place it came from wasn't so?
You've got to be careful with some songs because they're obviously rooted in Avodah Zarah, and they're referencing, I heard once a story of on a certain day in December, one of the chazanim in a shul, someone was used to tune for Silent Night for the Rav, and I was like, no, I can. Like, you can't use that one. And I know I once asked a Shiler about JSB, Johann Sebastian Bach and Vivaldi, who were writing songs that were used in Christian worship. So I think there we've got to be a little bit careful because of where it comes from. But Shirim Eina Mekablim Tumah, a melody itself you can't impurify it. You can't make it. It's not icky. It's not something that's inherently bad. It's a melody. It's a bunch of notes that have been put together in a certain order.
Right.
I think the problem is the association and that certain, Histalshelus. That's where things can be a little bit scary because we have associations in our own head of what those melodies mean and where they come from. But the melody itself is just a bunch of notes that have been put in a certain order. Yigdal also, people say that. That's like a variation of...
Really? I didn't know.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
We can be zealous about these things if we really want to be, It's but the truth is, melody itself doesn't makabel tuma. It's not mashbiya tuma. It's just a bunch of notes that have been put together. The problem is, how do we associate it in our own head?
Right. Just because it sounds old-fashioned and what we're used to.
If you come from anywhere east of Krakow, you're gonna start interacting with other modalities of music that are Oriental and they sound. Going towards what was the Ottoman Empire, we've inherited a lot of our melodies from that world. We were people who were moving around and traveling around and interacting with, that world. I spoke to Reb Aaron Heshen in Yerushalayim about the melodies from Iran. There's certain tunes that we sing in Lag BaOmer, and he said they're all Arabic songs. They're not Jewish songs inherently. Like he knows they're Arabic songs because the people who used to play them were Arabs. There were no... In the old Yeshuv in Yerushalayim and in Eretz Yisrael, there weren't so many Jewish musicians. So when they needed a band to play in Meron, they just went to the local Arab town and said, does anyone here play the lute and the drum? And they'd bring people along and jam along to the tunes. And those have become like the most Jewish songs.
Right.
Sounds so Jewish.
Just to touch on your recent journey with Thank You Hashem, starting with I think it started with your massive hit of Back of the Wagon.
Back of the Wagon, absolutely. If I've done one thing in my life, I know it was Lishmo, it was Back of the Wagon.
You didn't think 10 years ago that people would associate
definitely
Back of the Wagon
not. And when, it used to be the two close people knew me for, and now I walk around any Jewish neighborhood and it's like, Alex Clare, Back of the Wagon.
Yeah, it's definitely what my kids thought when they saw you.
Absolutely. Look, there's worse things to be associated with.
It's great. What is the audience that the music is intended for?
It's intended for everybody. It's just to have fun and to, give people a positive, fun Jewish experience. That's it. It's to bring some joy into people's lives with Yiddishkeit. It's so important that people feel simcha and people should have a means of connection through, modern means to connect to Hashem. Why not?
Beautiful. Some would say that music has to be educational in some form, right? Especially kids' music back in the day was, speaking about good midas and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I think there's an inherent quality in kids listening to kosher music.
Sure.
That is fun, right?
Sure.
Because there's so many alternatives out there.
Why can't we tell kids, traveling in the wagon of the Baal Shem Tov or being on the magic carpet of the Baba Sali, how many 6-year-olds knew who the Baba Sali was? How many 6-year-olds knew who the Baal Shem Tov was? Not many. Not many. So
it's bringing to life these story books, these small books that we grew up with as children, reading Baghdad, which was our first glimpse into the world of Gedolim as kids. This is bringing it to life in a more modern way.
Absolutely. And it's something that, to connect to the idea of tzaddikim and be inspired by them is huge. People always ask, what does it mean to be in the wagon of the Baal Shem Tov? And there's the whole drasha there, obviously. And then even bigger questions, what does it mean to be on the carpet of the Baba Sali? That's the latest one that people are like, what does it even mean? And then you explain that there's a story that's from the Baba Sali's great-great-grandfather, Shmuel Elbaz, who traveled on a carpet across the seas. So, they all have roots in the stories. And the association is that to be connected to Hashem's Torah and to be connected to the idea of the righteous and to be inspired by them and to, look up to them and to try and emulate them. That's what it really means to be in the back of the wagon of the Baal Shem Tov. It means to go in the way of the Baal Shem Tov or to go in the way of the Baba Sali. It's an idea that kids should be familiar with, and it's not, b'toich l'tanos, God forbid. It's on the contrary. It's coming very much from a place of encouraging kids to think about these ideas and to connect to holy people.
Beautiful. I've been at quite a few concerts with you, some at the Besht, which is a fantastic local place in northwest London, which I highly recommend any visitors coming to London to attend on a Thursday night, where Alex, you almost give a weekly share in a concert. I've noticed there that you sing Enum Zemiris quite often, right? And you're clearly very connected to that song. And it's beautiful when it's sang there. I was wondering what makes you connect to that song so deeply.
So, there's many tunes for Enum Zemiris. A lot of them, I didn't really understand Pshat in Enum Zemiris until I heard the Lubavitcher Rebbe's niggin for Enum Zemiris. When I heard that, I was like, okay, that's what it's meant to be. It's a deep song of longing and connection. A lot of the times when we hear a piyut, we tend to just, some of the melodies are sort of just forced in there, and you lose so much of what the words are trying to express. With Enum Zemiris, being that the whole context of that first stanza is about singing sweetly to Hashem, to be in the shadow of his hand, like that's why a person is singing. And that particular melody that from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, I feel really exemplifies that the words and the melody, even though the words obviously predate that melody by hundreds and hundreds of years, it just fits. It just hits you in the right place.
Fascinating how you can know words for so many years, and then you hear a song put to it, and suddenly the words make more sense.
Absolutely. It gives it character. Melody is expressing a part of what the soul is trying to achieve or feel. And sometimes it's a place in my own journey. I think hearing the Lubavitcher Rebbe's melody for Tamlach Nafshi, I think made me from. Literally made me from hearing that melody. I was like, I want that. That's what I want. I want that relationship with Hashem. It was a huge step in my own avodas Hashem, hearing that melody. Recording the Lubavitcher Rebbe singing, Tamlach Nafshi was like a game changer. They say by Aaron HaGadol Mekalin that when he created Kol Nidrei, it did the same thing. It made 10,000 Baalei Tshuva, they say. When they would hear the Aaron HaGadol sing Kol Nidrei, people were like, oh yeah, this is what Yiddishkeit is. The yearning for Hashem, the means of connecting to Hashem. And, that's what Yiddishkeit is. It's a vehicle to connect to the Rebbeinu Shalom. And melody is also a vehicle for connecting to the Rebbeinu Shalom.
Beautiful. Alex, that has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for coming
pleasure.
in.
All right.
I really appreciate it. And as usual, listeners can send in feedback and questions to podcast@jlead.org.uk. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.